Well, good day to you. It's Joel with The King Country, dropping in to let you know that our brand new film, Unsung Hero, is in theaters April 26th.
It's Luke here. We've teamed up with the creators of Jesus Revolution to bring you this adventure of a lifetime. It's a powerful, true story about a family uniting, growing in their faith, and facing the impossible together.
In theaters beginning April 26th. Join us in making opening night a family day at the theaters.
Rated PG. Parental guidance suggested.
The Vietnam War, it's over. Your job's just begun.
A new HBO original limited series.
Welcome to the world of spycraft. Strap in.
From executive producers Park Chan-wook and Robert Downey Jr.
What are you concealing?
Based on the Pulitzer Prize-winning novel by Viet Thanh Nguyen.
What if I told you that I was a communist spy?
How did you become this?
The Sympathizer, streaming April 14th on Max. Subscription required.
Welcome to The After Party, a TSF Network podcast, a mixtape of purposeful, encouraging, and fun content from across all the shows who are part of our podcast network. I'm Mandy Hernandez, the project manager.
And I'm Lonnie, the digital marketing specialist at TSF Network. Happy Friday, guys. Like yesterday, today's episode has a lot to teach us. It comes from Girls Night with Stephanie Mae Wilson, and it's called Find Your Fresh Start, What to Do When the Old Ways Are No Longer Working.
In this episode, Stephanie answers questions like, how do I identify the things in my life that no longer serve me? How do I become the healthiest, most whole person that I can be? And how do I know what to say yes to and what to say no to? All right, Stephanie, give it to us. Let's listen.
All right, friends, I am so excited for what we are doing today. I am sitting here with my new friend, author Shauna Niequist. Shauna, thank you so much for coming on Girls Night.
Oh, it's totally my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So, Shauna, for women who haven't gotten to meet you yet, can you tell us who you are, what you do, and a fun fact about yourself?
So I am a writer. I've been a writer for almost 20 years. And I'm a writer because I'm a reader. I'm a total bookworm, and that's like my favorite thing in the world. I live in New York City. I have 2 boys. I'm married to Aaron. And a fun fact about me is that I think the greatest technology, I was just telling someone this, the greatest technology of our generation is the Kindle, so that I can have all my books in one place. It makes me so happy.
Yep, I love that. Okay, well, before we dive in, I need to tell you kind of what's happening on my side of the chair, right at my side of the conversation. So one, I have 15-month-old twins who are sleeping next door.
Amazing.
And they are sick. So we have our babysitters here. She's amazing. But you might hear some really snotty, sad kiddos next door.
So if you guys sorry.
If you guys hear anything, that's what's happening. The other thing that is happening is, Shauna, I have to tell you, you are my favorite writer, just of all time. You're my favorite writer. And so to have you on the show is an enormous honor. I wanted to tell you, so I first came across your books about 10 years ago, and or across your writing. And it was right before I left on a year-long trip traveling around the world. And someone told me about your books, and they said, you need to read this author. She has a way of capturing your heart and putting it in a book, and you're going to love her. And it's true. And so I bought a copy of Cold Tangerines and Bittersweet, and I had a 50-pound backpack, and all of my possessions for the year had to fit in that backpack. And so I brought a Kindle with all the books that I needed on it, but I did bring physical copies of Cold Tangerines and Bittersweet. They were the only physical books I brought with me. So my copies are truly tattered, but you have been such an inspiration to me as a writer, and also just a really wonderful big sister to me throughout the years. And so I just am really grateful for you.
Oh my gosh, that is so meaningful to me. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah. So you guys, if you feel like, Stephanie's a little nervous, now you know why. So to dive in, you have a new book coming out called, I Guess I Haven't Learned That Yet, Discovering New Ways of Living When the Old Ones Stop Working. And I know that before a book can be written, it has to be lived. And so can you just tell us about the season of life that inspired you to write this book?
So, I've always committed as a writer, I approach each topic as not what do I think other people need to learn about, but instead, what do I need to learn about? So what is the thing that I want to explore? What is the thing that needs to be kind of healed up and addressed in my own life? And it was really obvious this time around. We moved from the Midwest to Manhattan. And before we moved, we had a really difficult couple years trying to figure out where we fit in the world, where we fit in a church community, where we fit with our friends, how to make it through some of the hard transitions of midlife and a changing faith and a changing family landscape. And so it felt like we were sort of lost. And then even we made this big move and we still felt lost in some ways. And we felt very overwhelmed by city life. And then I had some pretty serious health problems, and health problems are hard enough when you have like a family doctor that you've been going to forever. But when you're trying to like figure that out in the middle of a new city, that's hard too. And so it felt like sort of cascading changes and challenges where you just barely get through one and there's a whole set of other ones. And that's what was real in my life at the time. And so it felt like the only honest thing to write about was about those changes. And then at the very same time, it felt like, oh my gosh, I'm not alone. Like everybody I'm talking to, certainly in terms of a global pandemic, but also in terms of the way the church is changing and our culture is changing. I don't think I'm the only one who feels overwhelmed by the amount of change that they're weathering in their life right now. And so it's essentially a collection of essays about change, loss, curiosity, starting over, getting it wrong, making it right. I never approach books as an expert. I always speak as a friend, as a fellow journeyer, as a person who's asking all the same questions. But I think this one, even more than the others, is like, hey guys, I don't have the answers here. I just have a lot of questions and we can sit together while we ask them together.
Yeah. And that's so helpful. Just knowing that you're not alone in the questions, knowing that you're not alone in anything, it just makes everything better. I know that this idea of remaking your life has been really important to you at several moments throughout your life. You've written about it a couple times. And I think for a lot of us, we're speeding down this road in our lives and it feels like it might be too late to remake them. And so I want to hear from you, can you talk us through this? Is it too late? And if it's not, how do we know when we need to stop and reconfigure a few things?
I would say categorically, if you're still alive, it's not too late, really. And that sounds like a cliche that we say sometimes, but every choice you make, you're making your life. You're telling the world who you are. You're shaping your future, right? Even if you're making the same choice over and over again, that's a way of choosing, right? And so as long as you're still making choices, which all of us are, you can make new choices. You're never too old. One of the things that's been really exciting to me about this season is I've been talking with a lot of people and saying, listen, I made probably ostensibly my biggest life changes in my mid-40s. And so many people have been like, oh, hang on. I was 65. I was 70. I was 75. It's so inspiring to realize that the cement is still wet for all of us. We can remake our lives. And so the first part of your question, it's never too late. The other thing is I have an old friend who used to say, most of us never change unless the pain level gets high enough, right? It's easier to stay on the same path. But I would say one of the things that writing has really helped me with, being a writer means being a person who pays attention. It's being a noticer. It's really the heart of it. And because I've committed as a kind of a lifestyle to being a writer, I've had to pay attention to the increasing pain levels in various areas of my life. And even now when people ask me, I always tell women especially, if you want to start journaling, start with the questions of pain and desire. What hurts and what do you want? Those are questions that a lot of women are told not to ask. Don't pay attention to the pain.
Those are pretty hard.
Right? Those are hard questions. Yeah. If you were to say, I just want to check in with myself. I want to see how I'm doing. I want to see if I'm on track. Spend 7 mornings, the next 7 mornings, and ask yourself about pain and about desire. And I think you'll find out some things about yourself that maybe you haven't been willing to face yet. That's a good starting point.
I love that. Those really are kind of audacious questions for us to ask as women. They're questions that I think we spend a lot of time being taught, or there's some sort of, I don't know, I think it's like in the water that we shouldn't, I don't know, we should tamp down the things that we want or tamp down the things that are painful. And so I really love that. As we're looking at our lives, I know one of the things that you have been talking about lately is identifying the things that no longer serve you. How do we do this? And then how do we go about letting them go?
So I think it starts with those questions about pain and desire. And I think you find them first through solitude and then through really trusted people in your life, a really good therapist, a best friend, a mom or a sister, your husband or partner. A lot of times I think if you can start first with your own self. This is what I'm sensing. This is what I want. This is what hurts, right? Get comfortable saying those things to yourself. And then run it by a couple people who you really trust and see how they respond to it. And most likely they'll be like, oh, I've just been waiting for you to start talking about this in your own life. I've been watching you carry this really heavy thing and you're ready to lay it down and I can't wait to help you. And then the next step is taking action, and it's hard. But when I look back over my life, I have almost always acted too late. I've held on too long. I've tried to keep reviving things that were dead. And so I hope in the next several seasons of my life, I'm better at seeing what needs to end and letting it end. That's not something I've been great at historically.
Yeah, I can relate to that for sure. What kinds of categories of things can we decide aren't serving us? Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. I'd say all of them, but specifically a couple that I've had to really look at. I've had to look at friendships. A friend of mine was just talking to me about this, and he's kind of a mentor in my life. And he was saying, when was the last time you did a full relational inventory? I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. And he said, he spent some time in his life going through all of his key relationships and really asking himself, is this a person whose presence makes my life better? Do I admire them? Do I want to be more like them? Do I feel more like myself when we've spent time together? And then certainly there are some friendships that we're not always gaining things from, but do I feel committed to serving this person in this season? Do I feel committed to helping them in a season of pain? That can be a very valid friendship for some seasons. But he said it was really good to just look at the whole landscape and say, essentially, I deserve to have people in my life who make my life better. And I only want to give my energy to people who are giving that same kind of good energy back to me. Again, we all have hard seasons where we need to be carried or when we're in a lot of need. And that's a separate thing. But in terms of long, close friendships, there should be a good give and take, a good mutuality, a good reciprocity. And a lot of us don't take a close enough look at our friendships often enough to realize that that's not happening. So that's just one example. How is it looking in your friendship life? Another example would be the work that you do. Another example would be the way that you take care of your body. Another would be the home that you live in and the town that you live in. These are not default choices. We get to decide how we want to live. And it's worth going through, kind of turning over every stone and saying, is this still the life that I think is the best one for me? Because it's okay to make a change.
I love that. I feel like we just need to sit with that for a second. In the same vein, one of the things that you've talked about a lot for years is this concept of yes and no, like things that you say yes to, and then things that you say no to, setting some boundaries in your life. What does this look like? I'd love to know what this looks like in your life right now. Like, what are some things that you're saying yes to and some things you're saying no to? And then as you look over the last, I don't know, pick a number of years, 20 years, something like that. What are some things that you wish you would have known sooner about saying yes and saying no?
Well, the first answer that comes to mind is kind of a fun one. For a long season of my life, kind of the present over perfect season, a lot of that book was about working too much and being gone too much and wanting to focus more closely and more narrowly on kind of my people, my family, my home. And that was right for that time. And then we moved to a new city, and then there was a global pandemic, and then I had to finish a book. And so there were all these sort of restrictions that made my life and all of our lives a little pretty quiet. And then I finished the book, and things started opening up around New York. And I have one of the things I get to say yes to right now and is new friends. Aaron keeps joking with me, like, he's like, your social life is bonkers right now. And it's just, I met a writer friend and I went out to her neighborhood in Brooklyn and we had drinks together and we talked about books and we had a great time. And I had another friend she writes a column and she was reviewing a restaurant. She took me along as her plus one. And to get to engage in new friendships has been really exciting for me, to get to know new people. I'm naturally an outgoing person, an extroverted person, and it's been really fun for me in this season to get to say yes to some new friendships. Whereas in other seasons, I haven't been able to do that. My kids have needed more or the book has needed more. But in this season, that's been a really fun yes to be able to say.
I love that. I love that. So then, like overall, or looking back, what are like a couple key like bumpers that you've kind of like bumped into enough that you're like, I wish maybe I knew, or this was an important one to learn?
Yes. I mean, certainly putting appropriate kind of bumpers or brakes on my work life was one of the most transformational, most significant changes I ever made. And I still keep having to make adjustments, of course, but I'll never go back to the way of working and living that I was doing in my early to mid 30s. That wasn't right for me. It wasn't right for my marriage. It wasn't right for my parenting. It wasn't right for my values. But, and I know, you know some about this in your own career. Nobody else is going to keep those boundaries for you. It's a publisher's job. It's an event planner's job. It's a marketing person's job to give you more and more and more and more opportunities. It's not their job to keep track of how much you're working. They're going to keep asking, and that's good. Those are good opportunities. It's your job to put on the brakes, to put up the bumpers, to build the boundaries. No one's ever going to do that for you. And so, I learned very much the hard way how important that is. And now I don't mess around with that anymore. I don't every once in a while things will get a little too busy, but I learned that in such a deep way that I'm not going back anytime soon. Does that make sense?
Yeah. How do you know? Like, how do you decide? How do you decide where those bumpers lie? Like, is there sort of a trigger in your head that says, this is too much? Or is it like, I'll only do this many things a day or a week? Or like, how do you regulate that?
So for me, I've never been great at hard rules. Like, I only do this. Some people are like, I travel twice a month. It doesn't matter what that third thing is. I never do it. That has never worked for me. But for me, it's more like a rhythm of like addition and subtraction, right? So let's say I say, as a general guideline, I'm only going to travel twice a month. But then the third thing comes up and it's just amazing. And it's like center of the target. It's something I really care about. It's something I want to do. Okay, so I'm going to do it. But I'm going to clear the next month. Or I'm going to schedule an extra day on either side with my family. Or it's a little more fluid than that. And a lot of it comes down to paying attention real time. And not committing too far out in advance. Like there was a time where it was like, I was booked out almost 2 years. That, especially with kids, that doesn't work, right? Yeah. In 2 years, your kids are completely different people. You don't know what your life's going to look like then. And so I've worked really hard to stay as much in one school year as possible. And to pay attention all the way through to how it feels. Check in with my kids, check in with my husband, check in with my close friends, so that it can never get that far away from you. If you're always checking in and you're always making small adjustments, you can kind of stay closer to that healthy zone, as opposed to like, 2 years from now, I'll do a little assessment with a life coach. 2 years from now, who are you going to be? Yeah. So to set that regular check-in time with your closest people, I think keeps you closer to the center with small adjustments.
That's really helpful. I like that. I like that a lot. We, at the end of last year, there was just sort of a brief moment where the world felt sort of safe enough to venture out. And so we had, a couple of things back to back, and it felt like our suitcases were always packed and we were always doing 10,000 things. And it was stressful for me, and my husband was stressed, and the girls were, they were fine, but they don't know where we're going. But it was wild. And so at the end of last year, I really sat down and was like, we need 2 weeks in between house guests and we need 3 weeks between trips. Like, we just cannot. The pace of life that we used to keep just doesn't work when you have, toddlers, coming along with you. We just can't do it like that anymore.
Oh, absolutely. And even when I look back on it, I did, it never feels like this at the time, but like your girls will not remember these trips, right?
Yeah.
So like when I look back, I'm like, why didn't we just stay home? Right? Like now our kids are 10 and 15. They love to travel. It's exciting for them. It's fun to do together. But I look back and I wish that we would have kept things much more quiet and much closer to home during those little years. Just because it's hard to travel with toddlers. And I wish I would have felt the freedom to say, there's going to be a coming season where it's easy to travel, but this isn't it. So for what that's worth.
Well, that's it. Like, is there? Like,
oh yeah, 100%.
Well, people say that you need to kind of like the earlier you start, the better they'll be later or something.
Not with toddlers. Categorically not with toddlers. No, they're not. It's not like your 15-month-old is in training to carry her own passport through customs next time. Do you know what I mean? Like the toddler season, when I look back on it, I wish I would have just had like a room full of brightly colored toys and sat on the floor for 3 years. You know, like I took them so many places and I'm not sure why, you know, especially because now, like we travel with our kids all the time. So I would say like, maybe when they're 6 or 7 is when you can start building those patterns, right? That's when they can learn to eat all kinds of different foods or sleep anywhere or carry their own backpack. But like before 5, I don't know that you're instilling any patterns that are going to be useful for the future. You just might take them with you because it's fun for you, but you can start the training thing at like 6 or 7. I would say. I'm not an expert, but in my mind, I would say.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And we have a giant room full of brightly colored toys next door and I spend a lot of time just sitting on the floor.
Yes.
But that's good to know that we're not like, ruining them for future travel by not doing more.
Oh, not at all. No.
Okay.
I don't think so at all.
I really like that. I'm trying to decide which one of these questions I want to ask first. Let's go celebration. So this is kind of a throwback, but at the beginning of Cold Tangerines, you talk about the importance of celebration, even and especially when life feels the heaviest. I would love, especially right now, like the world has been, I keep wanting to say like the world is crazy. It is. It also has been crazy for basically as long as I can remember at this point. How do we do that? How do we still celebrate even now? Why should we? And isn't it how do we not feel insensitive about it?
I think it comes down to a couple different things. The first thing I think of and it's a great question. The first thing I think of is the Jesus words, rejoice with those who rejoice and mourn with those who mourn, right? So we're not saying your friend whose family member is in the hospital because of COVID, we should invite them to our fun, fancy party with balloons. That's not what we're saying. What we're saying is you bring that person a meal and you pray with them and you sit with them and you cry with them and you text every day to see how their mom is doing. And then at the very same time, your friend who's been desperate to get pregnant for ages and ages finally is having a healthy pregnancy and you throw a crazy party for her because you rejoice with what she's rejoicing over. So I think that's always, you're exactly right. It's tone deaf and insensitive to push people to celebrate when they're in a season of great mourning. But it's also not right to not celebrate the things that we've been longing for ages that are finally coming to fruition in our lives. You know, a friend of mine is, let's say 7 months sober. And every month he celebrates and we celebrate. And there are other hard things going on in the world, but we drop everything to cheer him on and say, I see you and I see your accomplishment and I see the health and wholeness in your life. And so I think it's not all celebration or none. I think it's about how we do it and what we choose to celebrate.
I love that. It's like, just like it's not right to push into celebration in times of mourning or like people who are mourning, it's also not right to ignore moments of celebration because they really matter also.
Absolutely. There are milestones. One of the things that was, I think, so genuinely painful about the long stretch of like the quarantine and lockdown is how many really meaningful milestones we didn't get to mark together, right?
Yeah.
Kids graduating and going to prom or choosing a college or
My
people
parents
getting
never saw me
engaged.
pregnant ever.
Yeah, the fact that we missed doing those things together, that's not right. That's not our communities at their best. And so I think whatever we can reclaim in terms of celebrating what's good, it doesn't negate the many, many painful things that are happening. But it's an important stake in the ground that says good is still emerging.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. I know that we are like in life hopefully on a constant journey towards becoming the healthiest, most whole versions of ourselves. When you look back over the last, again, like pick an amount of time, 20 years, something like that, what are some of the things that you have done for yourself that have been the most impactful towards becoming like the healthiest, most whole version of yourself?
The two first things that come to mind are time with a really good therapist and slowing my life down enough to have the margin to think and feel and rest in good ways. Those two things have changed everything. And I haven't always done them well, but when I have, those are the two of the things that have yielded the most growth and health in my life. And they go together. You know, there have been seasons in my life where I've had like a pretty good therapist, but I come flying in 2 minutes before the appointment. I go running out the second it's over. I don't take a second to process it. I go to bed too late. I wake up too early. I mean, at a certain point, I don't know how helpful that is, right? If your lifestyle doesn't allow for you to really soak in the enormity of the work you're doing with that therapist, it can't be super impactful. And so the two have to go together. And, you know, we all have, I think, a set of like vulnerabilities or like bad habits that we'll default to. And mine is always going to be going too fast, whether it's with work stuff or with fun stuff or travel. I'll keep myself too busy to think and feel on a deep level. And so when I'm able to slow down, that always yields the most growth and the most health in my life.
I know that like this question is going to be really familiar to you because there's just no way you haven't asked it a million times or like wrestled with it a million times, because I definitely know I have. What do you tell yourself when you're afraid that you're going to miss something? Like when it's slowing down and saying no to things, and like whether it's work stuff or social stuff, like how do you quiet that like fear of being left behind or, you know, straight up FOMO?
Yeah, I mean, I totally feel it and I get it wrong a lot of the time. For me, it comes down sort of to the law of diminishing returns. If I'm too tired, if I'm too frantic, if I'm too kind of spun out on busyness, I don't enjoy the good things in my life. And so saying yes to that thing, I won't even really be there for that thing. I won't even really get to taste and feel that thing because I'm so kind of, spun out on busyness. So if I can discipline myself to get good sleep, to get good quiet time, to walk, to get good writing done, to connect in meaningful one-on-one ways with the people in my life, that's when I really start to like taste and feel and experience the goodness of my life. And that's really worth it to me. So I try to hang on to that. And then the other thing, in terms of work, I always remind myself that I'm playing the long game. So like right now, it's very easy to think like everything's on the line for this book release. No, it's not. There'll be another book and another book and another book. This is what I want to do forever. And I'm not going to compromise my health, my marriage, my parenting life, my best friendships for this moment because I'm playing a longer game than that. I want to be a healthy, thriving, wise person with every next book and next book and next book. And that's what I'm invested in, not just this moment right here.
That is so good. I need to like rewind, replay, because it's so contrary to what I don't know, everything in the world. It's so hard to not feel that way, that like, this is the only time that or this is the moment that you have to like seize the moment. But the long game,
Well, and professionally, it's true. There are things you will miss out on if you say no to them, and other people will get those opportunities. I mean, I had people tell me very specifically, like, if you don't have a book in this catalog, we're going to give a book deal to some other lady and she's going to sell books instead. And I'm like, yeah, I will buy it. Good for her. There's space for all of us. You know, if you say yes to this tour, I'm going to book somebody else to speak in your place. I'm like, yeah, I know, that's the point, that someone else can do this. There are more than enough books, more than enough speakers, more than enough podcasts. It doesn't all hang on me. And I'm trying to be more than just a product. I'm trying to be a whole person over decades. And so when I keep that in mind long term, it helps me say no with a lot of freedom and confidence that this wasn't the thing that was going to change everything. This was one of the things, and there will be other things.
Well, and two, like to do the work that you do, and the kind of work that I, want to be doing, it's not helpful to anybody if we've sacrificed everything good about us and all of, like, without your health, without your, mind working its best way, without your connection to God and your people and stuff. It's like, you don't have anything good to say. And so if you spend it all on maybe this book launch is great, but there's nothing to, like, everything for the future's been compromised, I guess.
Oh, that's absolutely true. I mean, there were points when, I would say to people on my publishing team, they wanted another book and another book and another this. I was like, listen, I have been wearing a microphone for like 18 months. I've been on a stage or in a green room or on a plane or in a hotel. I need to learn some things. You need to give me some time to have something to say, because I've been talking for 18 months, and that does not make a good book. That doesn't even make a good human. I need to be quiet, and I need to listen, and I need to learn, and only then will there be something valuable for me to write or speak. But, that image of like farming, of leaving a field fallow, of letting there be a season for things to be quiet. We, as people who, I hate to use the word like content creators, but I get, as writers, as people who make or produce or say anything, the expectation that we are an unlimited well that produces on command is just not true. We have to tend lovingly to ourselves, and we have to be quiet enough to learn and listen in order to have something to say long term.
I love that so much. That's why I mean, Instagram is a really big struggle for me, because the lessons that I'm learning don't happen in bite-sized chunks every single day on command. And then also they don't tend to fit in a caption. It's always bigger than that and messier than that. And I mean, honestly, that's why I love podcasting, because it's so much, it just leaves so much more room for good things. But there's not, the best lessons in life don't happen, 300 characters at a time every single day.
And the reverse is true. If you spend every single kind of rich moment in your life goes on Instagram, you're never going to write a book, like not ever, If we give away little pieces of our story over and over and over real time because of pressure, because of this, what I love about a book is it's a long journey together, right? You're going to get to know me, and you're going to settle in, and you're going to like some parts and not like other parts. And that's a more meaningful connection to me than liking this post or this story or those bite-sized chunks. They end up not being, you never get a full meal, right? They're good for what they are, but you can't expect to feel truly nourished in a long-term way. Yeah.
It costs something to make it, but sort of like the idea of you get out what you put in, but it's like, it's you get a couple bites, you get an appetizer, but it's not.
And I would say different people are good at those different formats, right? And that's good. Bless them. There are some people who are absolutely best at delivering their best content via Instagram. Good for them. Yeah. And for some people, it's podcasts, and for some people, it's books. And figuring that out about yourself and then giving yourself the freedom to put less energy into those other things is really important. I have a couple friends who love speaking tours, like they love it. Like they can't wait to get back on a stage. And that's not true for me. And so I cheer them on when they do it, and they like cheer me on for staying home, because what's right for them doesn't have to be what's right for me.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like we should all tattoo that to our foreheads. So this is a giant conversation, but one of the things that I know you talk about in this new book is crying in church. And I know that some of there have been some shifts and changes in your faith in this last season. And I think that a lot of us are finding ourselves in that place. Our relationship with God doesn't feel maybe like it used to, or, maybe more accurately, our relationship with the church. And so I would love to know, just as much as you can share, what that's looked like for you, and, what you've been learning, and just anything that's helped you navigate through it.
Well, I think one of the most important things to keep in mind is that when your faith starts to shift, that's not a failure on your part. That's how it's supposed to be. If you said to me, I've been married for 20 years, and in the last 10 years, we've done everything the same over and over again. Don't worry, we haven't read a book about it. We haven't been to a therapist. We haven't been to a retreat. We just do the same thing all the time. You'd be like, that sounds insane, right? But we sometimes expect like all these other parts of our lives can change and grow and expand and progress, but not our faith, right? It has to like get cemented in when you're 6 years old and then look exactly the same all the way through. I don't think that makes sense. And so I don't think it's how humans work. I don't think it's how the human heart works. I don't think it's the pattern we necessarily see in scripture. And so I think if we could normalize the idea of our faith shifting and progressing the same way our bodies do, and our minds do, and our marriages do, and our best friendships do, I think that would be really healthy for us. So it's not so scary when one edge needs to be addressed, or there's one thing we need to leave behind. I think also to say there's not one perfect kind of church for all of us. And there's not one perfect kind of church for all of us, for all of our lives, right? It's not wrong to grow up in a particular tradition and then be a part of a little bit different one in your 20s and 30s, and then feel like in your 40s and 50s, you're ready for something even a little bit different. Those aren't failures on your part or on the part of the churches you've been a part of. It's okay to need and want and gravitate toward different things in different seasons. So, I grew up in a large church and I loved it. It was all I knew. That made total sense to me. That sort of felt normal to me. And now we go to a really small church and I love it. And it's not better or worse. It's just really different. And it's right for me right now. And I think to give ourselves and one another the freedom to say what I needed then is different than what I need now. And maybe what you need is different than what I need. It's okay to go to a big church or a small church, or a very traditional church or a very progressive church. It's okay to stay home sometimes. It's okay to read outside of your tradition. It's okay to have church with your 3 best friends and a worship album. Like, there are so many right ways to interact with our faith experiences. And I think the more we can reassure each other that God is big enough for all of those questions and all of the changes and all of the shifts, it's not something you have to be afraid of. It's a transformation that can really bring health and growth and healing.
Yeah, I like that. Have you had any moments where it's been hard for you to separate who God is and who Jesus is from who sometimes the church culture make them out to be? Like, how is there anything that's helped you navigate that recently?
Well, I would say one of the reasons I continue to choose to be a Christian, to choose to be devoted to my faith, to choose to grow and pray and confess and sing, is because I don't confuse the two. I think the church is in, some of my older friends, sometimes I ask big questions like, has it ever been this bad? Has a tradition ever kind of showed its flaws and cracks and limitations as directly as our tradition is showing right now? And some of my older friends are like, yes, every generation, this is how it works for there to be a very human, very flawed institution like the church.
Okay.
But also it feels pretty extreme to me.
Yeah.
it feels like we're pretty far off course in a lot of areas in terms of the wider American evangelical church. We have a lot that needs to change and needs to die and needs to get made right and that needs to be repented of, a lot. And for me, I have to start every one of those conversations by saying, I do not blame God for that. I blame humans. This is what we have done. This is a human, flawed institution. And a lot of people are doing their best and still getting it wrong. It's not necessarily about blame, but I know that this was not God's work. I know that he did not make mistakes in his church or in our world or in the culture. I know that this is about human failing. And those two things are really different to me. And I think it's easy to want a church to be absolutely everything. Until, though, I think when Aaron and I, our first couple big ministry experiences, like out of college, we moved away from our hometown. We were part of another church for a while, and we were on kind of like the senior staff. Like, who let us be on the senior staff? But that was where we had to realize, oh, this is just like human people doing their best. And we do not get it right every time. And it really gave us a good perspective on how, I think, an appropriate lowering of expectations for what it can be. Because it's just a bunch, it's like when you go to a Broadway show and sometimes it's just like so much greater than the sum of its parts. And it's like some sort of magic and alchemy. And how did this happen? And other times you're like, that's just 6 people standing there, isn't it? This is not happening, but not for lack of trying. So I think to have relatively low expectations for what can happen with a group of humans is pretty good. Yeah. That's not the same thing as making excuses for or dismissing the really sinful parts of the church. That's not what I'm saying at all. I think it's two different things. On one hand, it's going to be a mess because it's human people who are flawed, who are doing their best, who are getting it wrong. And then also there's a lot that's just plain wrong that we don't make excuses for, that we don't put under the rug of like, oh, humanity. There's a lot that needs to be corrected and changed. But I tend to think giving up on it doesn't make it better, right? Certainly, if you've been wounded by a particular church, I would never tell you to soldier on in that place. If those relationships have been broken, if you've been treated poorly, if you're carrying a lot of pain or trauma from that place, absolutely give yourself the gift of finding a new place. But like, I love being a volunteer in our church right now. I'm not a staff member. I do little jobs that they ask me to do occasionally, and I love it. And it's wonderful and imperfect and made of humans. And I believe in it more than I believe in any other possible alternative. I'd rather be a part of building this than staying home and talking about what's wrong with everything. And that's not true for everybody. I'm not saying everyone has to do it that way, but that's what works for me right now.
I really like that. It really, I didn't grow up in the church. I became a Christian when I was like 21. And so I missed out on all of the, I don't know, there are things like my husband and my friends will tell me about. I'm like, you guys listen to what? You guys wore t-shirts that said what? Like, this is bonkers. But I've been in it long enough to pick up some things that, and I haven't had like really bad church experiences personally. Thankfully, I know a lot of people have, but also, there's a wide variety of experiences, but it has been really, I feel like my daily work has been reminding myself that like, this is people, this isn't God. Like, or that was not what he was talking about, or like, that was not the plan. But it gets, sometimes like the messier it gets, the harder that work gets.
Absolutely. One thing that has really helped me, Aaron and I went, it was our 20th wedding anniversary, and we went to Rome, and it was amazing. It was just like a magic trip. But one of the things we did is we spent a day like in the Vatican City and going to St. Peter's. And when you hear, we did like a guided tour, and the woman who was leading it was so smart and it was just amazing. But like when you hear about like popes from the 1400s and the religious system as it was at that time and all of these buildings and all the corruption and all the money and stuff, it's really easy to look at them and be like, they were pretty far off track, right? And they were. But it helps you realize we all are. Every generation is, right? Yeah. Our generation is not unique in being off track, and theirs wasn't unique, but this is what humans do over and over. And sometimes we do better and sometimes we do worse. But the rule is generally we haven't gotten this right yet, but it gave us a little bit of grace for like, we're kind of a mess, but so were they. And so was the generation before that. And so will the next generation. And we're just all going to do our best in little daily ways.
Yeah. I like that. This is a total sidebar and then we can get back on track. But actually, I was studying abroad my junior year of college and in just a totally lost season of life. And I ended up, we were studying in Spain. We had a little spring break in Italy and we were in Rome. And I walked into the Sistine Chapel one morning. I was hungover and wearing a pub crawl t-shirt. And that's where I became a Christian. I met Jesus in there.
You're kidding.
It's not wild.
That's amazing. I looked at,
I turned around and saw The Last Judgment, which is not my favorite piece of art ever at all. But something about it, it just wasn't a painting. I just felt like I locked eyes with Jesus and was like, I want to know him. And that was a totally wild thought for me because I had so many things that I didn't understand about Christians at the time. But I want to know him. And that was probably 12 years ago, something like that.
Oh, I love that. Thank you for telling me that story. And
yeah. When you said Rome, I was like, man.
And that sort of, in some ways, speaks to this larger conversation, right? Like the whole process of making the Sistine Chapel was not particularly it was about competition and money and showing up other popes. And, the artist didn't want to do it. And it was, blah, blah, blah. It was very human, right? It was kind of a mess.
Yeah.
And yet it was a conduit for the Spirit of God to speak to your own heart all these years later.
Yeah.
Both are true, right?
Yeah.
That's really beautiful to me.
Yeah, me too. As we're sitting here, I'm about 10 years into my career as an author and a podcaster. And I would love to know maybe it's one of the things that we've already talked about, but if there's anything that you wish you could go back and tell yourself at this point in your career, anything that maybe would have helped you walk into the next 10 well.
Well, I think a lot of what we've talked about is about being willing to say no. And I think that's one of the biggest things. Again, there will always be opportunities, invitations, pressure, timelines. Nobody else is going to put the brakes on that except you.
Yeah.
They're going to ask and ask and ask and ask. And that's good. It's great to have opportunities. You're the one that's responsible for the pace of your own life and your family life and your marriage and your friends and how you want to build a life. You're the one that has to keep doing the math on that. Nobody else will. It's not their job. The other thing I would say is there's a lot of pressure to be sort of extremely well-defined, almost like a mood board. This is Stephanie and she likes this and she does this and she's known for ... And we're not mood boards. We're not products. We're not marketing campaigns. We're kooky human people who love some things and not other things and who change and who sometimes love this and then the next season love that. And so I would say fight hard to retain your quirky humanity and don't let your edges get too polished off, right?
Yeah.
At a certain point, I felt like, am I starting to look like all my writer friends? Do we all look the same? Do we all dress the same? Are all our book covers the same? There's a little machine that you start to go through that this is what looks good on stage. This is what looks good on a book cover. This is what looks good on a conference brochure. I don't think that's good for us. I think to fight for who exactly you are, that's the way through this. And then the last thing I would say is long game. Who do you want to be when you're 75 or 80? Every decision so a friend of mine who's my parenting guru, one of the things she says is when you have kids, every decision you make, the question you're asking is, what will help them become an independent, healthy adult, right? Every question, that's the real question. So there's a 15-month-old version of that. There's a 5-year-old version of that. There's a 15-year-old version of that. But you always have the same end goal, healthy, independent adult.
Yeah.
And I think the same kind of the professional version of that is, who do I want to be when I'm 80 professionally? What do I want to have made? What do I want to have built? What do I want to do little by little every year, every decade to get to that place? Make decisions from there, never from the hysteria of the publishing cycle or the conference schedule or the whatever. Play the long game.
I love that so much. So you might have just answered this last one, and these last several questions are super selfish, but you know what, you guys? Welcome. This is my show. We're doing it. So as you know, I'm a new mom, and I would love to know what a couple of things are that you wish you could go back and tell yourself kind of as a new mom. That really might have been one of them. Yeah.
Well, number one, I would not have taken my toddlers as many places. We talked about this, really. Toddlers have their best environments, and I would have kept them more often in those environments. I think we were some of those parents that we were like, they just come with us everywhere. They don't cramp our style at all. Until then, you're on an international flight with a toddler and you're like, oh, now he's cramping everyone's style, you know? But I would say...
We were totally like planning on being those people like, no, we'll just be our full selves and they'll get to like come along and it'll make them really cool adults. And then we had two. We're like, yeah, we just skipped right over being the like low key, we have a kid with us people. We are like full family, like bus status.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
As you should be. Like, do it the way that your family reality is inviting you. Accept what your family reality is and make choices based on that. And I think I pushed too hard to be like, no, this will be fine. Oh, this seems fine. Well, it wasn't. We should have slowed down, But the biggest thing I would say, and this isn't necessarily something I would go back and do differently. I think in seasons we've done it reasonably well, but this is like my favorite piece of parenting advice. There's a child psychologist named Wendy Mogul. She's my number one favorite. She wrote a book called The Blessing of the Skin Knee. It's like I've given out probably 100 copies. And I saw her speak at Lincoln Center, and she said, I've been seeing parents and kids for 3 decades. Parents are always worried. Kids are generally fine. And this is the piece of advice I give to every parent. It's the number one piece of advice. Be enchanted by whatever's enchanting your child. And I love that so much. And so, we have 2 boys. They're 10 and 15. It means I watch a lot of movies. I watch a lot of Marvel movies. I talk a lot about Pokemon. I go to diners where they only serve like burgers and milkshakes and grilled cheese. Like, to invest myself in what they're invested in, I think is always really worthwhile. And I think, so that's my number one piece of parenting advice.
I love that. Okay, so last but not least, what is something, or if you just whatever comes to mind, that you want every woman in their late 20s and early 30s to know?
Oh, okay. So the first thing that comes to mind is you are so much more beautiful than you think. And this is true. This is 100% true, because now I kind of have an old face, because I'm 45, and that's okay. Like, I don't feel bad about it. But when I look back at pictures, I'm like, oh, my skin was so beautiful. Oh my, but you don't know at the time. You don't appreciate it at the time. You completely, like, I wish I could go back to her and be like, you look pretty spectacular, or at least like upper 50%. Like, stop worrying. You're doing fine. The other thing, and this is a little bit more serious, but so I write about it all in the book. I've struggled with my weight and my appearance and my body over and over through various seasons. And then this last couple of years, it's been like challenge level 100. Like, I look different. I feel different. I've been sick. Like, I can't get it all pulled together. I don't feel like myself. And right in the middle of maybe the worst season of it, like, I was like, nothing fit. Everything looked weird. My skin was weird. It's like a whole bad situation. One of my best friends got married. And she's one of my best friends, but she's also a lot younger than me and extremely attractive. And so are all of her friends. And I was just watching this whole thing shape up, and I was like, this is going to be a little tricky for me. And I decided, I was like, you know what? I love her and I love weddings. And it was after like the long pandemic season. And I was like, I am going to dance every song all night long, as though I am the most beautiful, sensational person on the dance floor. I'm not even close. I'm not even like, this is a scene, but I'm not going to not dance, because I love to dance. Like, I love it. It makes me happy in my whole body, in my spirit. It makes me happy for days afterwards. And so I wore a dress that was like sort of medium. I kicked off my heels right away, and I danced every single song until they turned the lights off. And if you ask me what I'm proud of this last year, that's like in my top 3, because everything in me wanted to hide. Everything in me wanted to stay home. Everything in me wanted to be like the calm older lady who watched the young kids dance, right? It's just not who I am. I've been a dancer since the day I was born. I love music. I love to celebrate. And there was this tiny little stubborn part of me that says, I'm not going to give up on one of the best parts of who I am because I'm embarrassed about how it's going to look to other people. And so that's a long answer, but like, get out on the dance floor aggressively. Do not hide in your own life. Show up for your life, show up for weddings, show up for the people that you love, even if, especially if you don't feel great about doing it. Because then there are 2 problems, right? Then you don't feel great and you miss out on your life. I can't think of a time in the last several years where I woke up and was like, I am thrilled about my appearance and I can't wait to show it to people. But I'm determined to not miss out on my life because of it. And so that's it.
I'll just need to like lay down and soak in that for a few minutes. Sidebar, I'm going to a bachelorette party for my sister-in-law this weekend, and it is a very similar situation. I think after this, I'm going to go buy some pants because I still haven't bought like postpartum pants. I'm about to go buy some jeans that fit so that I can go hang out with the younger people. So I very much relate to that on like a very serious level.
Thanks for joining us again today. Make sure to check out more from Stephanie by searching Girls Night in your go-to podcast app and hit follow for more great content.
And before we head off for the weekend, please go visit Spotify or Apple and leave us a review. We would love to hear what you think about the show, for real. All right, enjoy your weekend.